Hello, everybody. I am going to comment just briefly on this is week 9. I put up that sheet showing the grammar translation approach with some nice videos just showing clips of that. And some of them are kind of messy. I mean, it's not a clean, I'm using actual videos from real classes in different places. But I put that and went up with audio lingual. And this particular chapter talks about strategies. Now, teaching strategies would be all the strategies that you'd use in any class. So I'm not going to try to cover all that in this chapter in addition to introducing these two old standbys. But I would like you to think about with the grammar translation and the audio lingual that each of them has some value in teaching. And people have gone back to them when they get desperate to make progress. Give you a few examples. The grammar translation grew out of the old, let's study Latin. And that was the universal language for educated people. It wasn't English or French even. But a long time ago, even before the Romans, it was Greek was considered the international language. And then it was Latin because the Romans had conquered so much. And because of the Christianity's embraced Latin. And so Latin persisted because of the influence of Christianity. Eastern Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Church was more Greek, and they used Greek, and the Western Catholic version used Latin. So Latin was both the Roman and the Roman Catholic language, and so it persisted because religion and the church was very influential, even though there were other churches at the time. The language persisted, and so you were expected to speak Latin if you were an educated person. Major doctoral thesis, major arguments were expected to be completed. You were to speak Latin, even though it became a dead language for the most part after the fall of the Roman Empire. It still persisted in the rise of Italian, French, and Spanish, which are rooted Romance languages. In addition, Romanian and Roman, which is a language in Switzerland, kind of related or from Latin. So Latin, how was it taught? Well, because it had become a dead language after 400 or 500 years, it was taught in the way that most things are taught in more primitive society. I think probably going back to the Egyptians when they taught young men to be scribes and how to write. It was dictation. I will tell you something and you will write it down. And if you don't get it right, I may hit you with a stick or you'll be punished or kicked out. So only certain people could learn to read or write. So it was restricted. Those who could read and write Latin were educated, and the vast majority of people were not educated. So it was kind of like a bit of a secret language. It was for those who, everything had to be done in Latin. You even notice now, it's kind of funny, if they're going to do an exorcism or we've got to get real serious and get rid of this evil presence here, we have to use Latin because Latin is almost magical compared to just using English or some other language. I always enjoy that. Still, the grammar translation method was a belief that Latin was a beautiful language, or at least an intellectually important language, and you learned to memorize it. You didn't improvise in it. You memorized it and you kept it in your head and you wrote exactly what Pliny or what Aristotle had written. Not Aristotle, he would have written Greek, but even that was studied. Greek was studied too, by the way. But anything that Seneca or any of the great Roman writers had written, then you would practice. They had epigrams, little sayings. They had speeches by Caesar. They had Caesar. One of the books that survived was Julius Caesar's memoirs of the Gallic Wars when he conquered France. And you can actually read a book that Julius Caesar wrote talking about when he conquered France, the land of the Gauls, it was called Gauls. So when you have a classic language like that, the attitude is memorization, copy, do it just like they did it then. You don't ad lib, you don't make changes to it. It's already perfect. You see this also in Arabic, classical Arabic from the Quran and from other writers. People study the language as it is. They don't improve on it. Their emphasis is on memorization and repeating it because it was considered perfect as it was, or almost perfect. So that's the attitude. Now, we don't have that attitude toward teaching now, but the grammar translation continues because a lot of times we'll have language teachers, they'll spend more time having you use a dictionary and memorize how to conjugate verbs for the tense or the plurals or whatever. And you write something in English, and then you take it and you translate it by writing it properly in Spanish. You may not even be able to speak the language, but you write it down and you get it grammatically correct. Emphasis on grammar, on proper order of the words and form of the words and spelling. But as far as conversing and talking casually, that's not very important. That's why grammar translation was always considered the high level best way to learn a language, but in fact it didn't teach you to be fluent in the language. People had to learn that by immersion in the language. They didn't have an organized way to do that because it wasn't taught that way. You basically learned language in the street. So grammar translation emphasizes form over function. Its correctness and structure is more important than communication. Now, I'm sure people would argue that's not exactly true. And of course, nothing is exactly like that. But that's the emphasis. Now, people didn't like that because what they did is they found themselves having to memorize all the time. The video I have in there from Dead Poets Society, the guy's saying agricola, agricolas, agricole, or something like that. That means agriculture or something. But you learn all the little endings, but you didn't learn them to converse. It wasn't talkative. It wasn't Latin for stand-up comics, if you want to know. Now, so that's been the tradition going way back. And then one of the other things to come out, and there were others before, but after grammar translation, right after World War II, and it was really after World War II, people said we need our soldiers to speak Korean or Chinese or Spanish, and we need to get professional diplomats, and we have to have them come in and they have to be able to go to a place and study and be able to come out with at least the basics of a language that they need to use in secret missions or in some kind of mission. And so what they did is they felt we can break the language down into its parts and have you memorize patterns. And then you are memorizing again. Remember this, you're memorizing again. And so you learn to say things like, first you say, my name is, and so in Spanish you say, me llamo. What would you say? Yo soy, or me llamo Glenn. I call myself Glenn. It's a reflexive verb. And so you would come up with, you would memorize this stuff. So you could just rattle it off. My name is so-and-so. I am Sergeant, I am here to do you know the way to San Jose or wherever you're going? And then, so you memorize these patterns. It was kind of like teaching language as a magic formula. If you learn these 10 things, you'll be able to get information from people while you're pointing a gun at them. That's comedy. So people learned that. And it was audiolingual. And you would have this tape, and you'd start the tape, and these people would have these microphones or headphones on, or microphones too. And then what they did is they'd listen to the voice, and then they would be recorded individually. So a person could actually go through and press buttons and say, this is what number 2 said when he's supposed to respond. Did he do it correctly? Number 3, did he do it correctly? I can't imagine teaching that way. Ugh. But it's like oral accounting or something. You're listening to people. And so they'd go through and they would just practice and practice and practice. And they put all these people in with a tape machine. So all of them were practicing together. And then they would try to record individuals and then look at their tape and see how much progress they're making. Somebody be the expert and say, he has the sound. I think that makes sense. And they would check to see. And the belief is after you've done something about 8 times or 10 times, then you're going to be more likely to, and you practice more or less every day intensely, you're going to be able to produce enough language that you can survive. Now, this is not an interesting way to learn a language. It's horrible, but it's called the audio lingual. Audio, you listen, and lingual, you speak. And so that was it. And it was basically training you. It wasn't learning, it was training you to produce sounds. You don't see those, but you see the old audio lingual laboratory, and it would have tapes, and you'd see headphones, and some people had and they had the big old tape machines with the big tape on it. Go to number 1. You had to make sure everybody's on the right one. And then you press the button, boom, and then it would go, do chapter 1, chapter 8, whatever it is. And so that's the history of audio lingual. What was it? What were they trying to do? Teach as many people as they could, as efficiently as they could, to speak a certain amount of language, as much as they could. So they would teach you how to go into a village, question people, get information, that you would learn stuff about the culture, but what's needed. It was all kind of based on, I always call secret spy, military, we're going to go to Vietnam, we're going to go to Korea, you're going to be parachuted into Thailand or someplace, and you're going to be operational, and you're going to need to be able to communicate with people. So you go through this, and they would build you up to where you spoke enough that you could get by, you could communicate with people. And of course, you're not going to be mistaken for a native, but that was the purpose of audio lingual. It was very good for what it was meant to be. It was meant to train you to teach. It's not the same as learning. Learning involves your engagement, your enjoyment of it, whereas training is you're going to be taught this information, and you're going to be able to produce it we're not going to give you interesting situations where you can innovate. We're going to make sure you can do all this. So you come in, I'm going to teach you 200 phrases in Vietnamese, and I'm going to make sure you know how to listen and the likely response to them. And so I'm going to call that good enough, because that's the only way I can do it. I can't send you to school in a Vietnamese speaking village and wait for 3 years till you come back and your fluency is improved. I want results, and I want them now. And audio lingual can produce that. And it emphasizes listening and speaking, which is good in some ways. It gives you a quick jump into that. But if you're going to learn a language and enjoy it and appreciate it, that is not how I'd want to learn French. It's have it crammed into me and be trained in it. So that's really the story behind that. Now, for the rest of the chapter, it talks about teaching strategies. I'm going to be showing those to you in this class. But those strategies, they mention a lot of different things in chapter 4. PSYOP is not so focused on the strategies as the overall organization of how you can put whatever strategies you want within the instructional part of the sheltered instruction. So if you want to use scaffolding, or you want to use a little audio lingual in there, you want to do some aspect of, see, all of these old ones I'm reviewing, audio lingual, grammar translate, they all have some value. They're not useless, not at all. But they are not in themselves the most efficient way to do it, and certainly not the enjoyable way to do it. Along comes after audio lingual, you'll find out communicative competence. What does that mean? That means that you're able to integrate your desire to use the language and get results. So you're asking questions that you want to ask, not asking questions that have been programmed into you, you know. So you get to choose, is how I would put it. Okay, well, that's all I want to say about this right now. I'll share more stuff with the videos and strategies later.